hoe kan grensoverschrijdende samenwerking juist die energietransitie versnellen? En dan ga ik meteen overschakelen in het Engels, want we hebben onder andere de German ambassador to the Netherlands, who is here with us today, Jean. The Dutch ambassador, of course, in Germany. Thank you very much for coming and joining us, Ronald van Roede. Arthur van Dijk is King's Commissioner in Noord-Holland and also President of the House of Dutch Provinces in Brussels. And Patricio Panchi is advisor for the Council of Free Movement we just spoke about of the Nordic Council of Ministers. First of all, let's talk these horizontal networks, gentlemen, senior ambassadors. How often do you meet each other, Mr. Noon, you and Mr. Van Roede?
Well, we meet at every time our bosses, which are many, federal, but also from Noord-Rijn-Westfalen meet, so that's a lot. Mm-hmm. We meet because we traveled together. I think Ronald will tell about our Grensland traveling, right, which is grenshopping from there to there, which is very nice. We covered half of our border. The second half has to be covered, and we will cover it in the next spring. It's a spring occupation. It's not a September occupation. So we enjoy the landscapes. And we meet also when we're in Berlin or The Hague. So it's constant.
And would there be, like stated in the last panel, some kind of... is the romance there between both countries, Mr. Noon?
Well, I'm very much Dutch in this one. Romance in the sense of let's be pragmatical and let's organize our... I'm married since 35 years, so the romance is good at the start, and then you organize yourself, and it works. It goes well.
That's good. Would you agree? Because we always have to check with the partner then as well.
Yeah, I think I'm living proof of the thesis by René Paas that this is perhaps the love border within Europe, because when I was a student, I had a girlfriend just across the border.
Wow! There we go.
I'm traveling, hitchhiking,
that
all the way.
Yes.
The relationship did not last, unfortunately, but I think what remained of this was an everlasting love and interest in Germany. So.
But had it anything to do with the cross-border differences, that the relationship didn't last, or was there something else?
Well, I think cross-border differences also have a fascinating thing, that you meet something that is unexpected, that is different.
Okay, I'm good.
Which I think is also a very attractive part of cross-border cooperation and exchange.
Yes, but I see you two meet each other quite often then. And Mr. Noon already spoke about that trip alongside the border, right? What kind of trip was that?
Well, I think it's kind of trip. I think also for us, it's very good to engage with, let's say, local stakeholders, be it authorities, be it business communities, be it NGOs. And just also for us, it's also to become aware of what is at stake, what are the interests, what are the problems, and how can we contribute to that also from our broader perspective. Mm-hmm. Because I'm actually representing the whole of the Netherlands in Berlin. Berlin is far from the Dutch border. Mm-hmm. Germany has more neighbors than just the Netherlands, or the Netherlands and Belgium. It has 9 neighboring countries, important parties like Poland and France. So interest from Berlin to the Dutch-German relationship is not a given thing.
Right.
So it's also something you have to sensitize, and then of course border cooperation, cross-border cooperation plays a very important role. Mm-hmm. And it's key for us to exchange, to be in talks with local stakeholders. And well, we did that up north last year, and I hope next spring we will travel down south.
That's good. And could we call them these encounters informal horizontal network? Would it be appropriate to call it like that?
The commissaris spoke a lot about the levels. You have the political level, then you have the regional level, then you have the communal level, and then you have the institutions, and then you have the teachers, and then you have the fire brigades, and then you have the boeren. And we tried to cover all that. We went to a boerderij, we went to a fire brigade, we went even to a noble German family who kind of cross-border manages land.
Yes.
But we went to Eemshaven, we went also to the industrial reality of our relations, and at the same time we saw mayors and commissioners. So that's what we do, and this is the reality of our working together. So yeah. It's really, and I very much would like also to say, it has to start very much also from down. If the boerderijen on the two sides of the border have no interest in each other, why should please the government of Noord-Rijn-Westfalen say let's do something? No, it has to come from down, and that's what we saw. It came from down. A lot comes from down from the people there, and that's very positive. I don't think it was always like that.
That's very good, of course, and it looks like it depends also on the willingness of you to join in and to actually get to know each other's challenges. Let's put it that way. Would you say it would be good to emphasize these encounters, these structure? Well, would it be good to professionalize or structure these encounters you have as we speak of horizontal networks?
I think to a certain extent they are pretty well professionalized in a way that I think you don't have to tell governments in North Rhine-Westphalia or in Nieder-Saxon or in The Hague about the importance. You also at the regional level you see several examples of well-established connections. It's actually, I would say it's rather professional. The thing actually that was also mentioned before is how can we find pragmatic solutions to existing there where it does not fit automatically. Like for instance, we've been talking about medical urgency services in the cross-border region, whereas there are requirements on the Dutch side of the border are different from the German side of the border. What kind of equipment, what kind of staffing on an ambulance, and actually there you have to find pragmatic solutions.
Right.
And I very much agree to, I think Anders Heidemann said that if the two sides of the border agree on a solution, then I think both in the capitals, The Hague and Berlin, you should be ready to accept that.
Right.
And I think this is a very good example. The other example is fire brigades cooperating ever more closely together, also with different points of departure.
Yesterday night, Minister Hanke Bruinslot emphasized again the cooperation between border regions. And like you already stated, it maybe already is in a professional way. We work together, and even these encounters are already professional and structured. Would you say there is a possibility then to develop these horizontal structures even more so in the future? And do you think there's a need to develop these structures?
I mean, I think it was the commissioner from Zeeland who said that between his province and Flanders, there is no new structure, no new administration. I completely agree. We don't need that. I mean, let me take examples always the best you can get. Amicare. Amicare is a new foundation between Maastricht and Aachen, where the science departments, the universities, have merged together in order to teach together their students in health diseases, mainly also heart-related problems. If you look at the bureaucratic way to that, it is just incredible. You have to agree on 1,000 things, but it did. Meaning that people studying in Maastricht and people studying in Aachen can go without further ado, they can go left, they can go right. Meaning that the teachers can go left, can go right, and meaning that the diplomas are recognized left and right. So this is a good example. Yeah. It's the first to my knowledge. As our Belgian friends are here, for us it's also very important to have also Leuven and other universities, because I think this triangular thing is to our advantage of all. But these are the things, and if you look at Amicare, for instance, who started that? It's the universities, it's the profs, it's not the governments. It is not the governments, it is not Noord-Rijn-Westfalen, it is not Olympus, it's the university. Let's do that.
Right.
Because it is good for us and because we have a nice product. Very attractive for third country students also. So that's the world in which we live, I would say. So let's be active, and structures are probably not needed. Amicare, last sentence, Amicare naturally explains what they did to others. So maybe tomorrow we will have Enschede and Münster or Oldenburg and here, maybe, but there it started.
Interesting. So you say if there is a need from society, let us as policymakers then try to facilitate that, right?
Would be my approach, yes.
Would be your approach.
Yeah.
Would you agree on that, Arthur van Dijk, King's Commission North Holland, and also President of the House of the Dutch Provinces in Brussels, that we should emphasize these structures then?
Yeah, we are talking about horizontal romances, I heard, and I think when it gets to a marriage, it's like a contract, and then you are more on the vertical side. So I think in a great extent, it works. But especially on big crises like energy transition, you need something more. And what we learned from the webinar we had in Brussels in October together with ITEM and the HMP, the Dutch House of Provinces, Martin Onfried, also researcher of ITEM, told us that a lot of European law that really underlines cooperation is not transposed into Dutch and German law. So actually when you are on the top of a crisis, then you really need more than only a romance, you really need a marriage, a contract. But on the other hand, before you get to that stage, you have to know each other very well. And that's the same with the romance, because if you don't know each other very well, the marriage will be very short. So you have to invest enormously in cooperation, knowing each other. And a good friend of mine said, and I always said, I said it as well in Brussels, is make hurry when you have time, because you don't have time when you're in a hurry. And I think that exactly happened when the floodings were in Limburg, when we had COVID, etc. You don't have time to think, you have to act. So investing in a good romance, and finally also taking your national government and European government to a level that you really can make a contract, so that you don't have those problems with ambulances and things like that, because it's not a question. You just do it. I think that's very important.
Yeah, so that was a very good example during COVID, of course. Never waste a good crisis. Then we were able to challenge that together. If we talk energy transition, that goes also both ways on the border. Would you say that goes the same then?
Absolutely.
Why and
how? Because I think we are all facing and challenging the same crisis in a way. I just had some conversations yesterday, and I learned that in Germany it's not better than in the Netherlands, and we really have a severe problem by giving companies. We have to choose now between hospitals or house building, because we don't have the energy anymore. And that's really a crisis. And I think that's the same in Germany. So we have to join forces and try to find new initiatives to solve this problem. And when you're talking about hydrogen and things like that, that should be a seamless flow of energy to both countries. I think that really we will really benefit, and that's the same, of course, between Zeeland and Belgium.
Yeah, but in a way, still we see that there are borders. If we talk about the energy transition, and we will talk about that later today as well. What would be your advice or your opinion as a policymaker to your fellow colleagues to pass on these borders and to crash these borders?
Most borders are invisible. You don't see them.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of legislation is in itself sometimes a border. So I was surprised a few years ago when I met ITEM, and I saw the process and the way they work. And I think it has all to do by knowing each other more and better. And I think that should be one of the, and our national government should also support my colleagues in giving them the freedom and task, because you can unify, for example, European cooperation, but you always have to customize a certain situation, because the cooperation with Belgium is not the same. It's not the same even with two Bundesländer and the Netherlands.
So you don't need to unify these structures.
Yes, so you have to create also a little bit of space. So it's both two of how do you say that, from both worlds, the best thing. But at the end, I think you really have to think on national level, also on the vertical side, how to transpose European laws in cross-border cooperation. Even, for example, to create joint, how do you call them, joint cooperation forces, for example. I don't think they are there at the moment. It's all about friendship, about romance, but finally, I think we benefit all when we really create a little bit more power under this cooperation.
And this will be also maybe a role then for you as King's Commissioners to emphasize these structures and that idea of empowering these cross-border cooperation.
My colleagues are there. They call them Rijksheren, and they have a special task, especially on this cross-border cooperation. Right. So I think the knowledge is there. They have a lot of years of experience, and I think also staff that's really capable of doing that.
Yeah. What did you think of the example of the Nordics? We just heard from Vibeke Hammer.
The grass is always greener as your neighbor, but when you look at the grass from above, you see also black spots. But I think that, but I think that's always difficult to translate that saying. But I think we should learn from that. But in our way, because the Netherlands is not the same like the Nordic, and it's not the same like Germany and Belgium. But when you customize and you take the best of both worlds again, I think we really can learn a lot from this.
Right. Now let's hear more about that from Petri Suurpanki. You're from Finland, working in Copenhagen. Yeah. They have it already. If you talk cross-border cooperation, you're a senior advisor for the Council of Free Movement of the Nordic Council of Ministers.
Yes.
Which differs from the Nordic Council of Parliament. Just for the record and for us,
yes.
What is the difference exactly?
Yeah, we do have the Nordic Council, which is the equivalent of the European Parliament, you can say. And then we have the Nordic Council of Ministers. There is no equivalent in the EU sense. I mean, like the Commission would be the closest, but we are interstate cooperation. We have no supranational power.
Right.
So we have 11 different ministerial councils for the Nordic Council of Ministers. So that's the difference. Yeah.
We are talking horizontal networks now, and maybe if we talk horizontal networks, the Council of Free Movement, or in a wider broad, the Nordic Council is maybe a already formalized structure of a horizontal network. Would you agree?
Yeah, in a sense, I mean, actually, our horizontal networks, they predate the Nordic Council of Ministers Freedom of Movement Council. We have had those in place for 20 years, those information services at the border and regional committees that work across the border. So those we have had for a long time. So the Freedom of Movement Council, I wouldn't count it as a horizontal actor in a sense. I mean, it's in a way, it's a lobbying organization, opposition towards our own legislation. So we gather information from the information services and from the horizontal network, and we channel it to the governments, and then we try to solve cases. We can't solve any cases ourselves. But I mean, that's my understanding of it.
Right. But if we're talking this, how can we learn maybe from your experience? I mean, how did it start in the Nordics?
Yeah.
Was there a specific reason to say, okay, let's arrange it, let's structure this right now?
Yeah, back in 2013 there was a prime ministerial declaration that we need to work on these issues, and 2014 we started the Freedom of Movement Council. We actually had earlier something that was called the Freedom of Movement Forum, but that forum didn't have a mandate like we have now, and every time we get a stronger mandate for the Freedom of Movement Council, there are also things happening that we get more things to do and a broader scope also for our activities. And if I say something else about the Freedom of Movement Council, so in a sense, it's we have a small secretariat, and we organize meetings every year, and we have a database that the governments actually they read the texts, and it's their texts and their descriptions on different border obstacles, on those different technical border obstacles that the information services give us, and then we analyze them at the secretariat. So it's the departments at the different countries that actually own the texts in the database. So with the database text, the members can work with these obstacles.
And what do you think then is key to the success of your Nordic Council?
Well, Vibeke also already on the video mentioned some things like the informality. I think that's very important.
Informality?
Yes, so that's even in the Nordic context, that's kind of like unique. We call ourselves the Wild West of the councils, because I mean, as she mentioned, we don't have any kind of like, we of course we have a protocol of the meeting and this kind of things.
But she said keep it simple.
Yes, so I mean, like we have a common objective, and that is to, in a sense, we have a mandate to attack the legislation of our own governments. Every country loves their own legislation. I think it's the same in Benelux as in the Nordics. So we are tolerated by the governments. We have this mandate. So that's something that we can really use in our context.
So informal, less structured, I mean, in a way that it's less formal.
Yeah.
Keep it simple.
Yes.
You have a mandate as well. What were the hiccups then?
Yeah, I'm coming to that too.
You were coming there.
Yeah. So some problems that we have is that we still, I mean, ours is an interstate intergovernmental cooperation, right? So we experience that it's rather easy to solve the easy border obstacles or the medium level border obstacles, but when it comes to the really big questions, then it's harder, because you need a lot of political will for that, and sometimes the will is maybe lacking, or maybe one thinks in the capitals that these this problem doesn't have that much volume. I mean, like there are not that many people or companies who are affected. So then those questions also, like they might be really important for the commuters, for example, but we can't solve them really easily within our context. So that's a kind of like a hiccup. Another one is that not all the members of the Nordic cooperation are actually part of the EU. So we have Norway and Iceland out. Well, there's an European economic cooperation too, but I mean, there are still some board obstacles there, and then Greenland and Faroe Islands are totally out of any kind of this kind of cooperation. So we have lots of. Often we also can't discriminate against third country nationals, right? Against the other EU citizens, right. And then, for example, third country nationals cannot work in another Nordic country, and they cannot commute, and so on and so forth. So we have lots of this kind of problems. So those are the hiccups.
There are hiccups, but obviously, as we've seen, a lot of positive effects from it, because that's why we think it's a very inspiring example you're setting in the Nordics. What would be your best advice then to us, if you could advise us to start off?
The same line that you should have a system that suits your purposes. I mean, you can't take another region system and then just put that in place. But I mean, what I would still say that, I mean, you talk about this horizontal cooperation, that's very important. You need to have those networks at place, and you need to make those networks meet each other, like in a sense that they have common conferences and platforms, and they share information on different kind of obstacles. So this kind of thing I would advise. And then also another thing is that, think about this mandate issue. I mean, like, Freedom of Movement Council has kind of like a Nordic mandate, and we talk about the questions collegially. I mean, everybody has to listen to other one's problems, even though that doesn't have very much to do with just your border. But I mean, all work actually happens nationally. So the national member, let's say Vibeke from Norway, she goes to the Norwegian departments and tries to solve issues in Norway. If Norway has a problem with Finland, it's not Vibeke who goes to the Finnish departments, but it's the Finnish member of the Freedom of Movement Council. But of course, Vibeke has a discussion with this Finnish member. So, I mean, it's actually national work, even though we have this kind of like Nordic Council. So that would be my give a strong mandate so you can use the aid of the departments in your country, the members, I mean.
And why is that inspirational? Is that a good example, would you say, if we talk these horizontal networks in the Netherlands, for instance, between Netherlands and Germany?
Well, in the bilateral context, we have a structure which is well established and which works. It's if you can say it's top down. We have our Chancellor and the Premier who meet next time in February. We have the regional ministers who come. The Minister of Niedersachsen comes here in February. So for us as a federation, it's very important that the top and the lender get a message which is a common message. Not that easy, not because they don't want to, but because in the German reality the lender are rather independent and having their policy, so that is very important. And then we have between the cities, I was mentioning Aachen, Maastricht, and between the villages, etc. So it's kind of top down. Where I completely agree is that you hear very often the same at a level, and then you say, okay, is that really necessary to repeat? The Chancellor repeats what Mr. Wüst says, and Mr. Wüst repeats what the Mayor of Aachen says. Is that really necessary? Is that really good? Not sure. Perhaps not. Positively, you could say it's one message. Others, you could also say, why don't we put more and more structured energy into these discussions? And the question is then that is networking, that is putting the elements together, that is putting also coming back to the groundwork together. Again, my point, we need more groundwork going up. Because from up to down, it's a structure, it's there, it's important, our neighbors, we love each other, border, blah, blah. And that's a little bit fossilized, if you want. So you have to put the energy from down. And from down there are many fields where you can, it was mentioned, water, inundation, stikstof, tourism, whatever. You can put airplanes landing at night, whatever. There are 1,000 topics, but these topics have to come from the communities. An airplane who lands at night at Maastricht, and which is disturbing to Maastricht. It's Maastricht who has to do the point. It will not be The Hague. Well, it might be a point. By the way, it's not a point, but I just.
But it could be a good example.
Yeah, yeah. So
Okay,
could be,
but
yeah.
I understand that it should be more bottom-up and from society.
I would say so, yeah.
Thank you so much. I know there are questions from the audience, and I'm looking now at Pim Mertens, because vragen komen bij Pim binnen. Pim, what comes up in your laptop right now?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, there are questions indeed. The participants agree that the Freedom of Movement Council is a powerful tool and they found it really interesting. But they also raised the question that the Nordic countries were also against the European cross-border mechanism that also tried to solve the cross-border obstacles as such. And then the question is, how could the Freedom of Movement Council also address the legal obstacles outside of the field of freedom of movement, for example, technical standards, procedures?
Mr. Suipaki,
Yeah.
that's yours.
Yeah. Well, there are quite few, there are not very many like ECBM. Solutions in the Nordics, and I would say also what happens when it comes to, well, we have a definition for our border obstacles, and that is that those are public laws or regulations or practices. And those cause problems for the individual or the businesses when they use their freedom of movement within the Nordic countries. So if you never left your country, you didn't end up in this problem. So as soon as you end up in this kind of context, then that's a border obstacle. So that's how we understand the border obstacles. And actually we do work rather strictly within this context. And I also wanted to say earlier that we see kind of like a phenomenon that we get bigger questions all the time on our agenda that don't fulfill this definition that we have. Like we should focus more on transport cooperation, or we should solve these problems with the banks that you don't get a bank account, and that's not like entirely public sector, right? There's a private sector aspect as well. So we struggle also with this definition issue a bit.
One more question then maybe, Pim. Yes.
Yes. Yeah, that's also regarding the strong mandate we heard and also the advice of the Donnerbergs to adapt and not to change legislation. Would you advise from the Nordic perspective to have an even stronger mandate to also fix these regional issues that are not on the top of the political agendas?
Yeah, well, let's say, again, I mean, there's an overlap in our system that we have we also have some regional organizations that also members of the AEBR, right? So Association of European Border Regions. And in that context, we have also another ministerial council for that. So we actually at the Freedom of Movement Council, anything that doesn't have to do with this definition of a border obstacle, we don't work with. I mean, we only work with issues that have to do with this definition that I just gave you, basically.
Right, thank you so much for the time right now. Dankjewel. Pim, als er nog meer vragen komen, gaan we die ook nog later schriftelijk beantwoorden. En misschien gaan we straks nog in deze sessie nog meer vragen kunnen beantwoorden. Voor dit moment dank ik hartelijk. Thank you so much, Mr. Nunt van Roeden, Mr. Van Dijk en Patrick Sopanki. Dank u wel.